Yeah, I'm not really surprised that President Trump is sending Tom Homan in because ICE, DHS, Kristi Noem have been a political disaster. Because just take a look here. It's even lower, minus 27 points on the net approval rating of ICE. Of course, this all being done under Kristi Noem.
Donald Trump just faced what sources are calling a full-scale revolt from his own Republican senators, and his response might be the most authoritarian move of his entire presidency. We're not talking about a few moderate Republicans expressing mild concerns. We're talking about multiple MAGA-aligned senators who've been Trump loyalists reportedly demanding investigations that could expose what administration critics are calling murders by federal agents. And Trump's alleged solution? Sources suggest he might be working with Speaker Mike Johnson to shut down Congress entirely, to send everyone home, to prevent investigations from moving forward by making sure there's no legislative body in session to conduct them. This isn't normal political maneuvering. This could be a president so terrified of what investigations might reveal that he's potentially willing to shut down the entire government to prevent the truth from coming out. And if that's really what's happening, we might be witnessing the moment Trump crosses from authoritarian tendencies into actual authoritarian governance. But before we break down how catastrophic this Senate revolt could be for Trump's entire immigration enforcement strategy, real quick.
This so-called excuse of border security, where Minneapolis is over 300 miles from the United States border, we have an unleashing federal agents and violence, exerting a tremendous amount of violence and lost life against the American people.
You cannot trust mainstream media to explain what shutting down Congress to avoid accountability really means for American democracy. That's why we built John Brown Show, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want analysis that actually connects Trump's panic to the constitutional crisis potentially unfolding, hit that subscribe button right now. Because what happens over the next few days could determine whether Congress still has any power to investigate presidential misconduct. Your subscription actually matters here. All right, let's get into what sources suggest is actually happening behind the scenes, because this represents something that could be far more significant than typical congressional gridlock. When multiple Republican senators who've been Trump's most reliable defenders start publicly calling for investigations into federal agent conduct, that signals the political ground might be shifting in ways Trump can't control. When Trump's response reportedly involves working with Mike Johnson to keep Congress out of session, that suggests panic, desperation, fear of what investigations might uncover. And when you combine a Senate revolt with potential congressional shutdown to prevent accountability, you're looking at what could be a fundamental breakdown of constitutional governance. Trump might be demonstrating that when faced with oversight he can't stop through normal means. He'll try to eliminate oversight entirely by shutting down the institution responsible for it. Let's start with why Republicans might be revolting against Trump's immigration enforcement approach, because sources suggest the polling numbers are absolutely catastrophic and getting worse every day. And when senators see numbers this bad, they start worrying about their own political survival rather than maintaining loyalty to a president whose policies could sink them. Reports indicate ICE approval ratings have reportedly collapsed to historic lows. During Trump's first term, net approval was around 0. Not great, but balanced between supporters and critics. But sources suggest that by mid-2025, after operations in places like Los Angeles, approval had dropped to -7, already deep in negative territory. And then allegedly, after the Minneapolis incidents, approval cratered to -27. That's not just unpopular, that could represent one of the lowest approval ratings for any federal agency in modern polling history. Think about what that means politically. Republicans need to defend these policies in midterm elections that are already looking difficult. But how do you defend something that's -27 in approval? How do you campaign on immigration enforcement when voters overwhelmingly disapprove of how it's being conducted? You can't. Which means senators representing competitive states might be facing a choice between continued Trump loyalty and political suicide. And it's not just ICE specifically. Sources indicate broader Department of Homeland Security approval has reportedly tanked as well. During Trump's first term, DHS approval was around 59%, solid majority support, but reports suggest current approval might have dropped to 42%. That's a 17-point collapse in public confidence. When an entire cabinet department loses that much support that quickly, the political implications are enormous. Make sure you're subscribed to John Brown Show, because what makes these numbers particularly dangerous for Republicans is that they reportedly show a clear trajectory downward. This isn't a one-time polling blip that might recover. Sources suggest approval keeps dropping with each new incident, each new video, each new controversy. That creates pressure on senators to distance themselves before numbers get even worse and become impossible to overcome in campaigns. And there's reportedly specific concern about Secretary Kristi Noem's approval ratings. Sources indicate every single poll conducted on Noem shows negative net approval, not one poll showing positive ratings. She's allegedly become so politically toxic that even Trump reportedly replaced her with Tom Homan for Minnesota operations because he supposedly thinks Homan is better at public relations. When your cabinet secretary is so unpopular the president won't let her do television interviews, that's a political disaster. So what exactly are Republican senators reportedly demanding? Because the specifics of their revolt could reveal just how serious the political pressure has become. And sources suggest what they're asking for goes far beyond typical oversight requests. They might be demanding investigations that could fundamentally expose how federal immigration enforcement has been operating. Reports indicate Senator Dave McCormick of Pennsylvania released a statement calling for full investigation into what administration critics are calling a killing by federal agents. And he's allegedly not alone. Sources suggest multiple Republican senators have publicly called for investigations. Names being reported include Cassidy, Murkowski, Tillis, Collins, and Ricketts. These aren't all moderates. Some of these are senators who've been reliable Trump allies on most issues. When your own party members start demanding investigations into federal agent conduct, that's a revolt. That's senators calculating that the political risk of defending current operations outweighs whatever loyalty they feel to Trump. That's Republicans looking at those polling numbers and deciding they need separation from policies that could destroy them in competitive races. And Democrats in the Senate have reportedly seized on this Republican vulnerability by announcing detailed conditions they want in any Department of Homeland Security funding bill. Sources suggest their demands include independent federal and state investigations that involve Minnesota officials looking into agent conduct and tactics. Requirements for body cameras that would actually be mandatory rather than just funded. Bans on agents wearing face masks during operations. Elimination of roving patrols. Ending what critics call invented administrative warrants that allegedly bypass judges. Stopping arrest quotas. Share this video with everyone you know, because think about what those Democratic demands represent. They're not asking for minor policy tweaks. They're reportedly demanding fundamental restructuring of how immigration enforcement operates, transparency requirements, accountability mechanisms, elimination of practices that critics argue violate constitutional rights. And they're making these demands at a moment when they allegedly have leverage because moderate Democrats have said they cannot support funding without reforms. The political calculation reportedly works like this. Democrats need Republican votes to pass anything. Republicans need Democratic votes to fund the government. But some Democrats have allegedly drawn a red line saying they won't fund DHS under current operations. And some Republicans are reportedly vulnerable enough politically that they might break ranks to support reforms rather than defend deeply unpopular policies. That creates potential for bipartisan coalition that could force Trump to accept oversight he desperately wants to avoid. But what makes this Senate revolt potentially devastating for Trump is that it's happening while sources suggest he's actively trying to cover up what federal agents have done. And the cover-up attempts might be so blatant that even some Republicans are reportedly uncomfortable defending them. When your own party starts questioning whether you're being honest about federal agent conduct, you've lost control of the narrative. Reports indicate Trump administration officials made claims about incidents that video evidence allegedly contradicts. Sources suggest administration figures claimed individuals were brandishing weapons or threatening agents when footage might show something very different. That creates a credibility problem. When your official statements don't match what people can see with their own eyes, defending becomes impossible. And sources indicate the administration might have initially resisted preserving evidence properly, that agents allegedly left scenes before proper protocols were followed, that it required a Trump-appointed judge blocking interference to ensure evidence wasn't destroyed or tampered with. When judges have to intervene to prevent evidence destruction, that suggests consciousness of guilt. That suggests people who know what investigations might reveal and want to prevent those revelations. Make sure you're subscribed because reports also suggest there's been mass resignations at the Department of Justice. That career attorneys might be quitting rather than participating in what they allegedly see as cover-up instructions. When prosecutors resign rather than follow orders, that sends a powerful message about what those orders might involve. That suggests lawyers with professional ethics concluding they're being asked to obstruct justice rather than pursue it. And there's reportedly another element that makes cover-up allegations more credible. Sources indicate the agents involved in controversial incidents have already left Minnesota, that they're working on other operations elsewhere, which means they're not available for questioning by state or local authorities. They've been moved beyond reach of investigations they don't control. That's not how innocent people who acted properly behave. That's how you operate when you want to prevent accountability. Think about the contrast with how the administration allegedly responded to other incidents. When a different person died, sources suggest the administration immediately launched investigations into that person's partner, looking for connections to activist groups, checking social media for criticism of Trump, essentially trying to find justifications for the death by investigating the victim rather than the agents. But when federal agents might be responsible, suddenly investigations are resisted, evidence isn't properly preserved, and agents are moved beyond reach. That double standard is what's reportedly driving even some Republicans to demand real accountability. So how is Trump allegedly responding to this Senate revolt and demands for investigations? Sources suggest the strategy might be to simply shut down Congress, to make sure there's no legislative body in session that could conduct hearings, subpoena witnesses, or pass oversight legislation. And if that's really the plan, it could represent one of the most brazen attempts to avoid accountability in presidential history. Reports indicate the House has already passed a DHS funding bill that would fully fund current operations without the reforms Democrats are demanding. But the House is now in recess. Speaker Mike Johnson allegedly has Congress out of session, and sources suggest Johnson might be coordinating with Trump to keep Congress shut down rather than allowing Senate negotiations to produce oversight mechanisms Trump doesn't want. The timing reportedly works like this. Democrats in the Senate have leverage right now because some moderate Democrats won't support funding without reforms, and some Republicans might be vulnerable enough to break ranks and support those reforms. That creates possibility of bipartisan legislation that includes real oversight and accountability mechanisms. But legislation requires Congress to be in session to pass. If Johnson keeps the House out of session, no legislation moves forward, no oversight gets enacted, and the government potentially shuts down. But Trump might calculate that's preferable to accepting investigations he can't control. Think about what that strategy reveals. Trump allegedly isn't trying to win the argument about whether investigations are justified. He's potentially trying to prevent the argument from happening by eliminating the forum where it would take place. That's not debate. That's not democratic governance. That could be authoritarian tactics where accountability is avoided through raw power rather than persuasive justification. And sources suggest there's another element to this strategy. A government shutdown blamed on Democratic demands for investigations might be something Trump thinks he can spin as Democrats choosing politics over governing. He might calculate that voters will blame Democrats for forcing a shutdown rather than recognizing he's the one refusing accountability. That's always been Trump's pattern. Create a crisis, blame opponents for the crisis, and use the chaos to avoid consequences. Share this with everyone because the constitutional implications could be staggering. If presidents can avoid congressional investigations by simply keeping Congress shut down, what oversight mechanism remains? The power of the purse requires Congress to be in session to exercise it. Investigative authority requires hearings and subpoenas that require functioning legislative bodies. If Trump successfully uses government shutdown to prevent investigations, he's potentially discovered a way to make himself unaccountable to Congress, regardless of what he does. But there's reportedly a deeper concern driving some of this Senate revolt beyond just political polling. Sources suggest some members of Congress are beginning to view ICE operations not as law enforcement, but as what critics are calling Trump's personal standing army. And if that characterization starts gaining traction even among some Republicans, the political dynamics could shift dramatically. The concerns reportedly center on how agents are being deployed and what their actual mission appears to be. Sources indicate agents aren't from the communities where they operate. They don't know local conditions or populations. They're allegedly shipped in from elsewhere, paid substantial salaries plus significant bonuses, and then deployed in ways that critics argue are designed more to create chaos than to actually enforce immigration law effectively. And there are reportedly questions about what orders these agents are operating under. When agents allegedly flee scenes before properly preserving evidence, when they leave jurisdictions immediately after controversial incidents, when their conduct appears to violate normal law enforcement protocols, that raises questions about whether they're following standard operating procedures or special instructions. And if they're following special instructions, who's giving those instructions and what do those instructions say? Make sure you're subscribed to John Brown Show because sources suggest there's particular concern about what some are calling invented legal authorities. Reports indicate agents might be operating under what critics call administrative warrants that allegedly bypass normal judicial oversight. That they're supposedly making arrests under expedited procedures that don't involve judges reviewing probable cause. That the usual constitutional protections aren't being applied because agents are operating under claimed emergency authorities that might not actually exist. When you combine agents operating outside normal constitutional constraints with agents who aren't accountable to local authorities, with agents who are allegedly incentivized through bonuses to maximize arrests, regardless of whether those arrests are justified, you potentially create what critics are calling a standing army. Not law enforcement operating under rule of law, but force operating under direct presidential control without effective checks. And if that characterization is accurate, it would represent exactly the kind of threat to liberty that the founders designed the Constitution to prevent. Now let's talk about what makes Trump's alleged cover-up attempts particularly concerning from a legal perspective. Because sources suggest there might be actual evidence destruction or tampering occurring, and if prosecutors can eventually prove systematic evidence destruction related to federal agent misconduct, the legal consequences could be devastating, not just for individual agents, but potentially for the officials who ordered or permitted the destruction. Reports indicate it required judicial intervention to preserve evidence from certain incidents. A Trump-appointed judge allegedly had to issue orders blocking administration officials from interfering with or removing or destroying evidence. Think about what that means. The judge apparently believed there was real risk that evidence would be destroyed if not specifically protected by court order. That's not routine judicial caution. That's a judge who's seen enough to believe evidence destruction is likely without intervention. And sources indicate social media platforms might be involved in covering up what happened. Reports suggest TikTok, which was recently acquired by entities friendly to Trump, has allegedly been removing videos showing certain incidents. That eyewitness footage documenting what occurred is being taken down from platforms where millions of Americans might otherwise see it. That prevents the public from accessing evidence that contradicts official narratives. That keeps people dependent on administration statements rather than being able to evaluate evidence themselves. When you combine evidence not being properly preserved at scenes, with agents being moved beyond reach of state investigations, with social media footage being removed from public platforms, you potentially have coordinated cover-up across multiple institutions. And if that coordination can be proven, if communications exist showing officials instructing evidence destruction or suppression, the legal exposure becomes enormous. Obstruction of justice, conspiracy to obstruct, civil rights violations. The potential charges multiply when cover-up is systematic, rather than individual agents acting alone. Think about what investigations with proper resources might uncover. Communications between administration officials discussing how to handle evidence, instructions to social media platforms about removing specific content, orders moving agents to new locations to avoid questioning, budget allocations showing bonuses tied to arrest numbers regardless of outcomes. All of this could potentially exist in emails, text messages, official memos, and once investigations start with subpoena power, information that seemed hidden often emerges. So what can Democrats and concerned Republicans actually do if Trump shuts down Congress to avoid investigations? Because sources suggest there might be options beyond just waiting for Trump to allow Congress to reconvene. Options that could force accountability even if the president is trying to prevent it through shutdown tactics. State investigations reportedly offer one avenue. Federal agents operating in states are still subject to state law in many respects. State attorneys general can launch investigations. State courts can issue subpoenas. State prosecutors can potentially bring charges under state statutes. Trump can't shut down state governments the way he might be able to keep Congress in recess. That creates accountability mechanisms beyond federal legislative oversight, and judicial oversight continues regardless of whether Congress is in session. Federal judges can hear cases challenging administration actions, can issue injunctions blocking policies they find unconstitutional, can order production of documents and testimony. The courts remain open and functioning even during government shutdowns. That provides another check on executive power that Trump can't simply eliminate by keeping Congress closed. Sources also suggest there might be ways to force Congress back into session. Members can potentially call special sessions under certain circumstances. If enough senators demand reconvening to address what they characterize as emergency situations, Speaker Johnson might face pressure from his own caucus to bring the House back. The politics of keeping Congress shut down while crises mount and investigations are being demanded could become untenable even for loyalists like Johnson. Share this video with everyone you know because public pressure reportedly matters enormously in these situations. When polling shows ICE at -27 approval and dropping, when senators are hearing from constituents demanding accountability, when protests and organizing create visible opposition, politicians respond. They start calculating that defending Trump costs more politically than breaking with him. That's what happened with this Senate revolt. That's what could force Congress back into session despite Trump's wishes. And sources suggest this could be a defining moment for whether American democracy still functions. If Trump can avoid accountability by shutting down Congress, if he can prevent investigations through raw power rather than legal justification, if he can operate federal agents as a personal force without oversight, then constitutional constraints have failed. But if Senate revolt continues, if state investigations proceed, if courts enforce constitutional limits, if public pressure forces congressional action despite Trump's resistance, then the system still has life. The next few weeks might determine which of those futures we're heading toward. So here's what this Senate revolt and potential congressional shutdown represent. Multiple Republican senators who've been Trump allies reportedly demanding investigations they know Trump doesn't want. Democrats leveraging the moment to demand fundamental reforms to immigration enforcement. Trump allegedly so panicked about what investigations might reveal that he's working with Mike Johnson to keep Congress shut down entirely. Evidence potentially being destroyed or hidden. Agents moved beyond reach of accountability. And a confrontation emerging over whether Congress still has power to investigate presidential misconduct or whether Trump can avoid oversight through shutdown tactics. The political stakes are enormous. Republicans revolting because polling shows immigration enforcement has become toxic with voters. Democrats seeing opportunity to force reforms that protect constitutional rights. Trump calculating he'd rather shut down government than accept investigations. And all of this happening while sources suggest systematic cover-up might be occurring to hide what federal agents actually did. This could be the moment that determines whether Trump's presidency continues operating within constitutional constraints or fully transitions to authoritarian governance, where accountability is prevented through power rather than persuasion. Whether Senate revolt leads to real investigations or Trump successfully shuts down Congress to avoid them. Whether the system still has checks that function or whether presidents can now make themselves unaccountable through strategic use of shutdowns. Make sure you're subscribed to John Brown Show because we're covering every development in this showdown. Every senator who joins the revolt, every move Trump makes to avoid investigations, every strategy opposition uses to force accountability. This is the constitutional crisis we've been warning about, and we're tracking every aspect as it potentially determines the future of American democracy. Stay tuned.